Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, you're very welcome. This is Reading the Past and I'm Dr. Cat. And today's video is another one that's based on audience request. In fact, I would say that this topic is probably the most requested topic that I've ever covered on this channel. It's come in my comment section, my social media, and also in my email. A number of you have sent me a link to the same video, and it's David Shakespeare's video on the so-called pregnancy portrait of Elizabeth I. You've asked me to watch the video and then come on here and tell you what I thought of it. And so that's what we're going to do today. I hope you enjoy. David Shakespeare describes himself as, quote, a retired orthopaedic surgeon with no literary background. I want to be clear. I see his intervention in this discussion as evidence of the value of interdisciplinarity. His analysis of this portrait, to my mind, is forensic, as are the techniques he uses. I believe it to be nuanced, informative, and definitely worth watching. However, I also need to flag up my own lack of experience here. I am not a conservator or a curator. David Shakespeare has performed digital manipulations on details from this portrait and others in order to highlight evidentiary support for his arguments. In regard to these techniques, I am frankly ill-equipped to comment on their efficacy or indeed how recognisable they would be within this particular sphere of study. With that being said, there is one technique that David Shakespeare puts forward that I want to draw attention to because, to my mind, I found it to be particularly compelling as an argument. His image map and image grid, as far as I'm concerned, are really interesting techniques for portrait comparison. Now, I am saying that, as I said, as somebody who does not have the particular expertise in this area, being neither a curator nor a conservator. Therefore, I don't know how reliable or recognisable a technique this would be within those circles. I'd love to know what your thoughts and opinions on this technique are. And I mean that if you are like me, an amateur, but I think especially if you happen to move in these circles. If you yourself are a conservator or curator, either professionally or in training, perhaps you might be able to tell us about how reliable or recognisable these things are as a technique. I think further explanation of this would be really useful for us, and I'd love to see that in the comment section. I also want to highlight that in addition to the video that he has kindly shared with us on YouTube, and which I will be leaving linked in the description box below, he has also provided us with an expansion for his arguments in the form of a 92-page PDF document, which is in the description box of his video. Towards the start of his PDF, he offers the following clarification. Quote, the views expressed in this study are entirely my own as of May 2018. I offer them in good faith. As more information or indeed alternative explanations of my findings come to light, I may modify them. Please ensure that you are reading the most up-to-date version. I am making this document freely available in order to stimulate further discussion and research. Please feel free to share it with friends and other researchers. If quoted, I would be grateful if you would do me the courtesy of referencing the work to myself, even if your views differ from my own. David Shakespeare. I really appreciate this statement by David Shakespeare, and I will certainly be engaging with his video and the arguments and statements he makes within it with this in mind. We are told that the de Vere Society first saw this presentation. The society is, quote, dedicated to the proposition that the works of Shakespeare were written by Edward de Vere, 17th Earl of Oxford. Now, I have made a video on my own response to the authorship debate, which I will leave linked in a card, and I'm not going to discuss further here. David Shakespeare goes on to inform us that the questions about this portrait that he is raising through this presentation were inspired by the work of Dr. Paul Altrocci, whose own work, Killing of a Unique Genius, has a chapter that discusses the portrait. In this chapter, Altrocci asserts that the pregnancy of the portrait subject, quote, has not been disputed in the art literature. I would counter this by saying that perhaps this is because it is, in fact, unremarked upon. The presumed pregnancy of this sitter is, for example, not referred to in the Royal Collection's website entry on the work, which I am showing on screen now. We are told instead that it is on display at Hampton Court Palace, that it is by Marcus Gheeraerts the Younger, and that it goes under the title of Portrait of an Unknown Woman. We are told that the believed date of creation for this work is between 1590 and 1600. You may wish to pause the video so that you can read this description. However, I will also be leaving it linked in my own description box. I'm now showing a screenshot from David Shakespeare's video, and this information that is being shown here has further supplementation in the PDF that he has produced. This detail that he's gone into, it expands upon what is on the Royal Collection Trust's website. He gives us greater detail of the journey that is taken by this particular work of art. And he includes for us the different names that this painting was known by. At number 8, he tells us that in 1838, Queen Victoria moved it to Hampton Court Palace, the year that that palace opened to the public. In both his PDF and the words he says while speaking over this slide, he insinuates that this move was done deliberately to get the painting out of Queen Victoria's sight. Now, I'm aware that this is going to feel like an incredibly small point to start picking on, but when I heard him say this, I did pause my video, go back, re-watch it, and I then went away and Googled around, because I'm not entirely sure what he is getting at here. On the one hand, it seems like he's intimating that Elizabeth I is a problem for Queen Victoria, perhaps that she had some issue with the legacy of this former female monarch. Then I thought, well, maybe that's not what he's talking about. Perhaps this is a reflection of the so-called Victorian morality, that Queen Victoria would have an issue with a portrait showing a pregnant Queen Elizabeth, the famously unmarried virgin queen in this state would go against this queen's sensibilities. Either way, he doesn't specify what he's getting at here, and I do think that the argument he's making could benefit if he does clarify what he is intimating. At around 1 minute and 20, David Shakespeare puts up this slide, where he states, "We can assume that everything in the portrait is there for a reason." To my mind, this is not a controversial thing to say. I fully support what he is stating here, because when you look at the works of art that are being created around this time, and indeed just before and afterwards, I think that this is something that is part of the Renaissance, if you like, technique of art. When we look at these pieces, we see code, symbolism and allegory being the order of the day. People are making identities and sending sometimes quite obscure and secret messages through the presentation of themselves and their loved ones in art. But I'm interested to know whether you agree, so do let me know in the comments section underneath this video. However, there is something that is up for debate when we look at these codes, symbols and allegories in works of art, and that is how they were intended to be read. The first thing I would like to question is how sure we are that the woman represented in this portrait is pregnant, or indeed meant to be read as being pregnant. The proposed date of creation for this portrait, around about 1600 give or take, comes in between two other paintings, also by Marcus Gheeraerts the Younger, and I'm showing them now. These two paintings are held in the Tate collection rather than the Royal Collection. These women certainly appear to be more obviously pregnant, at least as far as I can see. When we compare the portrait from Hampton Court Palace with the ones that are held by the Tate, all by the same artist, to my mind, it actually argues against the idea that the woman in the painting from around 1600 is pregnant. But what do you think? David Shakespeare goes on to provide us with a synopsis of a chapter or article by Alison Sorby, in which she, quote, argues that the style of depicting a pregnant woman at the end of the 16th century was to emphasise the swollen abdomen, sometimes with a hand resting on top. This certainly does seem to be the case in work by other artists and indeed by Marcus Gheeraerts. He continues with his synopsis. She observes that the large diagonal fold in the robe, parallel to the lapel, does not conform to this style, and she therefore dismisses the pregnancy. To counter Sorby's claims, David Shakespeare uses some of those techniques that I mentioned at the top of this video. To aid his argument, David Shakespeare has overlaid a series of lines onto the portrait. With the yellow, he is showing us the centre line. In the white, he is showing us, he claims, the outline and lines of the embroidered or painted garment. The blue lines show those folds described by Alison Sorby, which Shakespeare asserts are in fact not from the garment, but from its overlying wrap. He then draws our attention to the two rings, which hang from the subject's neck on cords. David Shakespeare argues that these ring cords show a convexity. He sees them as hanging over a swelling. He also uses an overlay of Isaac Oliver's rainbow portrait to highlight the difference in how the respective garments hang. His only explanation for the way that the gown hangs in the former portrait is the pregnancy of the subject. In fact, he states that there is, quote, no other explanation. I'll be honest, this feels like a bit of a reach to me. However, I am willing to recognise my own bias. In what I am currently choosing to refer to as the before times, I used to be employed to deliver education sessions at Hampton Court Palace, and as such I spent a lot of time in front of and around this portrait, and during that time it never once crossed my mind that the subject of this portrait might be pregnant. But what do you think? He reminds us of Sir Roy Strong's belief that Virgo Persica was the inspiration for the portrait, that the costume presented in Boissard's Clothes of the Gentry of the World on this figure is what is used by Gheeraerts for his portrait. David Shakespeare also acknowledges that this woman has a pregnant appearance, which he puts down in the most part to her awkward stance. However, David Shakespeare queries Sir Roy Strong's assertion that this was the inspiration for Gheeraerts by showing this image from the same work of a Turkish princess. According to David Shakespeare, the Turkish princess is both the source of inspiration for Gheeraerts and definitely pregnant, unlike Sir Roy Strong's Persian Virgin, whose stance is what makes her look pregnant. And while I can certainly see where David Shakespeare is coming from in this, I'm not as sure as he is. And in large part, that is because when looking at Boissard's collection, a startling number of the female figures look similar. By the criteria set down by Shakespeare, it looks like Boissard is showing a lot of pregnant women in his collection, and I'm not quite sure why that would be, and why he would make no mention of it. I'm undecided as to whether the figure in this portrait is supposed to be Elizabeth I, and or if she is intended to be shown as being pregnant. It is plausible to me that we are being shown a pregnant Elizabeth here. However, if that is the case, I think this pregnancy is allegorical rather than actual, a celebration of the fertility of her rule rather than her physical body. Rumours of concealed pregnancies and births swirled around Elizabeth for much of her life, and indeed have continued to do so after her death. It was rumoured that she had fallen pregnant by her stepmother, Catherine Parr's, new husband, Thomas Seymour, in the late 1540s, that she had a secret love child with Robert Dudley. Indeed, in 1587, a man claiming to be named Arthur Dudley turned up in Spain. He alleged to be the son of the Queen and her favourite. Judging by his supposed age, it was considered that he would probably have had to have been conceived in around 1561. It's also been suggested that Henry Wriothesley, 3rd Earl of Southampton, who was born on the 6th of October 1573, was her son by Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford. This is known as the Prince Tudor theory. No doubt there are other candidates as well. I believe that concealing a pregnancy, and especially a birth, would have been nearly impossible for Elizabeth, or, for that matter, any high-profile woman. Privacy, at least as we know it, was an alien concept. Elizabeth did not eat, sleep, or bathe alone. The cleanliness of her linens was the responsibility of others. If she had stopped menstruating, it would have been swiftly apparent and, I believe, remarked upon. Even before her body could show the telltale signs of swelling to the rest of the world, her secret would have been betrayed. Both before and after becoming queen, the women who surrounded Elizabeth would have been intimately aware of her health and body. The chances that at least one of them wasn't also a paid spy for an English nobleman or a foreign prince is, to me at least, implausible. In fact, I will go further, because there is no doubt, in my mind, that throughout her reign, Elizabeth's enemies in Roman Catholic Europe had eyes upon her, and they certainly wouldn't have kept her secret. Rather, they would have tried to weaponise it, to turn her people against her for immorality, and to attempt to create the chaos that could allow them to invade in order to force England back in line with the Holy See of Rome. News of a pregnancy or birth outside of wedlock of an English queen would have been political dynamite. Perhaps we are seeing Elizabeth here, not pregnant, but in a costume. Masking was a very popular court pastime, and in fact it would become even more extravagant a practice in the next reign. Maybe someone is commemorating Elizabeth taking part in just such an event. Itself a sign of the court celebrating a significant occurrence. I would argue that it's possible that this is showing a memory of a celebration for the Anglo-Ottoman trading capitulations of May 1580, themselves following on from the negotiations of the 1570s. After the excommunication of Elizabeth, England found itself alongside the Ottoman Empire in a shared opposition to Catholic Europe. This break, and the Reformation of which it was a part, had also left England with a surplus of papal or Catholic materials that could be recycled into an Anglo-Ottoman trading commodity. As Bernadette Andrea explains, early modern Protestantism and Islam held strong affinities, both politically, as allies against the Catholic Habsburg powers, and ideologically, as iconoclasts and rigorous monotheists. Indeed, Sultan Murad III praised, quote, the Lutheran sect in Flanders and Spain, because they do not worship idols, having banished idols and portraits and bells from churches, and declared your faith by stating that God Almighty is one, and holy Jesus is his prophet and servant, and now, with heart and soul, are seeking and desirous of the true faith. For her part, Queen Elizabeth overtly played upon England's Protestant iconoclasm when communicating with her Ottoman counterpart. In a letter to Murad III, dated the 25th of October 1579, she opens with a Latin salutation, which was translated as follows by Richard Hakluyt in the Principal Navigations. Elizabeth, by the grace of most mighty God and only creator of heaven and earth, of England, France, and Ireland Queen, the most invincible and most mighty defender of the Christian faith against all kind of idolatries, of all that live among the Christians and falsely profess the name of Christ, unto the most imperial and most invincible prince, Zoldan Murad Khan, the most mighty ruler of the kingdom of Turkey, sole and above all, and most sovereign monarch of the East Empire, greeting and many happy fortunate years with abundance of the best things. Jonathan Burton describes this as a, quote, strategic use of religious rhetoric to provide ideological support for what became an infamous arms trade, end quote. Through her role as the most mighty defender of the Christian faith against all kind of idolatries, which was realised in the iconoclastic plundering of England's Catholic churches and abbeys, Elizabeth had caused her Commonwealth to have an abundance of broken bells and images. This so-called bell metal was exported from England to the Ottoman Empire, alongside iron, steel, lead, copper, muskets, sword blades, brimstone, saltpetre, and gunpowder. Although none of the correspondence between Elizabeth and Murad III mentions the arms trade, Elizabeth is conspicuously advertising herself as an iconoclast and enemy of Catholic Europe in these letters. In doing so, she employs religious rhetoric to validate her own religious policy, to emphasise a shared, idol-free religious practice that exists between her faith, the Protestant faith, and Islam. She is reminding Murad III of their shared enemy, Catholic Europe. As Jonathan Burton explains, quote, "The term bell metals soon came to denote the prohibited goods that England would ship furtively to Turkish territories, where they would be used to create ordnance or weaponry." England's Ottoman trading partners were recycling the nation's bell metal into tools that might be used to threaten the idolatrous Papal States, their shared enemy, with destruction. It's possible that in this, David Shakespeare and I are in agreement, that we can see an Ottoman connection in this portrait. He, in fact, finds preference for the Ottoman connection than he does for the Persian one, despite the fact that at times this portrait has been known as Unknown Woman in Persian Dress. He is assured that the costume is intended, at least, to refer to a Turkish or Ottoman costume. To prove his point, he takes us to this image of Roxolana, and he draws our attention to her headdress, which certainly appears to be very similar to the one shown in the portrait. Roxolana was an incredibly powerful figure in the Ottoman Empire. She is commonly seen as being one of, if not the originator of the so-called Sultanate of Women, in which she was able to transform her place as mother of the Sultan into a role that occupied a position of extraordinary political power. In later years, Elizabeth I would enjoy a correspondence relationship which was both diplomatic and friendly with one of Roxolana's successors, another mother of a sultan who enjoyed extraordinary political power over the Ottoman Empire. Safia Sultan was the consort of Sultan Murad III and was the mother of his heir, Sultan Mehmed III. Although she, and indeed her political opinions, were uncommonly valued by Murad III, nevertheless, it was after his death in 1595 that she was able to attain the heights of her powers in her role as mother of the Sultan. In fact, she is arguably one of the most powerful Valide Sultan in all of Ottoman history. She would enter into a correspondence and gift-giving relationship with Elizabeth I. Elizabeth sent a jewelled portrait of herself and, apparently, a golden coach, which this sultan's mother used to scandalise her city, as she could be seen in public travelling in it. It is said that in return, Elizabeth received fabulous garments and jewellery. Is it possible that Elizabeth is being shown in this portrait in one of these very gifts? Is the clothing Turkish? And is this portrait a celebration of the growing friendship and relationship between this Queen of England and the Ottoman Sultan's mother? Some argue that the figure in this portrait is not in Turkish dress at all, nor is she Elizabeth. Jerry Broughton reminds us of another candidate, known as Aura Sultana. She may have come to Elizabeth's court with Anthony Jenkins, one of the earliest Englishmen to establish diplomatic and commercial connections with Persia. It is believed that while he was returning home from one of these journeys, he bought the enslaved woman who was known as Aura Sultana. It seems that she, or at least somebody remarkably like her, would become a lady-in-waiting to Elizabeth at around this time. Broughton believes that Aura Sultana may have performed a very specific function in Elizabeth's household, namely as what seems to be a proto-stylist, advising the Queen on matters of fashion. Broughton goes further to suggest that Aura Sultana may also be the figure in this portrait. But what do you think? I am particularly interested by David Shakespeare's assertion that what we see in this portrait is Elizabeth represented as Diana, and even more so that this portrait was intended to be part of a pair, a diptych, if you will, portraying Elizabeth as mythical figures, both as Diana, goddess of the hunt, fertility and the moon, and as Astrea, the famous celestial virgin. No doubt, both of these mythical women, Diana and Astraea, were in use for the iconography of Elizabeth worship during this period. It does strike me as just the sort of thing that she would have enjoyed, this diptych of her as mythical women. And if an individual, or even a group, was seeking Elizabeth's favour or forgiveness, then this portrait, particularly if it was paired as part of that diptych, would be an appropriately grovelling gesture, as far as I'm concerned. But what do you think? As always, I'm looking forward to reading your discussions in the comments section underneath the video, or you can come and find me over on my social media. I'll leave links to my Instagram and Twitter in the description box. You can follow me there and we can continue this conversation. I do hope you've enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, then please let me know by hitting the thumbs up. Please also subscribe to this channel, and while you're there, hit the notification bell next to the subscribe button so that YouTube tells you when I've next uploaded. I hope you're going to have a great day whatever you're doing, and I look forward to speaking to you all in my next video. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye for now.